All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm Cecilia Koger. I'm the Director of Exhibitions for Angels Gate Cultural Center. Just a few announcements before we begin our event. You can enable closed captioning. It's under the More button at the bottom of your Zoom menu. On iPads, it's under Meeting Settings. We're not live streaming this event. However, the meeting will be recorded and clips may be used in the future for educational and promotional purposes. And for the enjoyment of everyone, unless you are one of our artist panelists, we ask that you keep yourself on mute. At the end of the virtual walkthrough, there will be an opportunity to ask questions directly to the artists. You can put those in chat at any time, or during the Q&A, you can unmute yourself at that time and ask artists your questions directly when we invite you to participate. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Angels Gate Cultural Center is located in San Pedro in the South Bay, Port of Los Angeles region in California. We recognize that we live and work on the traditional and sacred lands of the Tongva, Kizh, Ahachiman, and Chumash, and the many other indigenous groups who call these grounds home. We at Angels Gate Cultural Center honor and extend our gratitude to all of the original peoples still living in this region. Now I'd like to briefly introduce our talk. We are thrilled to present Gallery Conversations, which is a series that explores our contemporary exhibitions on view in our galleries at Angels Gate Cultural Center with our current exhibition, Trade Fair Social. Trade Fair Social is guest curated by Mark Rumsey, an artist based in Michigan who made the journey all the way to California to bring together this group of artists whose works are embedded with social practice and may even request a call to action. With that teaser, I'd like to invite Mark to tell us a little bit more about this exhibition that he curated. I'd like to know how and why you came to this exhibition. And then after that, talk about the exhibition in general. I'd love for you to take us through the exhibition virtually. So I'd like to hand it off to you, Mark.
All right, sounds good. So as Cecilia said, I'm Mark Rumsey. I'm a Midwestern artist. I don't really, I've never really considered myself a curator, but then in hindsight, I've curated a lot of shows. But making stuff has always been my primary goal. So part of it, I think, is looking at terms. So we're using social practice as this very broad term that encompasses a lot of different modes of making that really engage the audience as a participant and as a key part of the work itself versus just a viewer. And that really, for me, started with the idea of social sculpture from Joseph Beuys, where it's this idea of actively making the world around you, and that it's not something exclusive just to people who identify as an artist, but it's something that humans do all the time, and if they are doing it consciously, then can impact what they want their world to be like. That kind of evolved. So that was my art training. That was like going to art school. That was about as far as it had gone at that point. And then in the 90s, Boyot came up with the idea of relational aesthetics, in which that humans are are very integral in the art itself. That interaction was the art making. And so now we've gotten to a point where there's all sorts of different artists approaching making in different ways that are participatory, engaging. And so we get this wide, broad umbrella term of social practice. So that was the idea behind coming up with a curatorial proposal. Of course, that proposal happened before COVID. So we're like 3 years later after that proposal, and and all the artists involved in the original proposal are all doing different work and moving into different places. I mean, like geographically moving all over. So it's so is like a kind of putting this together, these pieces together with this kind of common element of where it's really about the audience. It's less to do with like us as individual artists ego. It's about creating situations that engage people and prompt them to participate. It's the I feel like I'm rambling. Should I say?
No, not at all. I thought that was great. And I'm wondering, Annie, if you can pull up the virtual. I know that three of our artists are from out of state. Is it 2 or 3? I know Mark and Kelly, 3 of our artists, and Carol. No. So thank you all for also making the trip. We had a very successful opening a few weeks ago, and you all flew out or drove in the LA traffic to come to the opening. So that's wonderful. Yeah, so maybe if we can sort of pan around the gallery and maybe start with our first piece that you encounter in the exhibit by Melissa. So Melissa, take us through this piece.
All right. So this piece originated when I was back in grad school, and I was given the assignment to create a spaceship. And I was in school. I was at, well, as you might imagine, I was in a cinema school, and I was largely surrounded by men, young men. And once this assignment was given, there were a lot of very phallic rockets being made. And in general, when I started this animation program, it was very clear to me that it was not, it was still not an equal playing field. And so I felt like I was making a lot of works that sort of felt, just even in making them, like an act of resistance, or at least an interruption to what I was seeing and what was happening and what was just so kind of easily celebrated and what wasn't celebrated. So I wanted to celebrate the uterus form and just bring that form and merge it with that concept of a spaceship. And then that, it really became the beginning of a conversation. And so that is how this piece came to be. But I originally had it 3D printed, and then it was really fragile. And so it broke into about 4 different pieces, and I tucked it away in a closet, and I just hadn't thought about it in a long time until Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it kind of brought my brain right back to the uterus spaceship. And I was like, I really loved that object. I loved making that object. I loved the conversations that started with that object. And so I brought it back to life. And originally, when I brought it back I was planning on developing a website, because again, one thing that I loved about even making it to begin with is that it caused conversations. It just had people were just like, find this form fraught with possibilities. And of course, there's all kinds of interesting elements to what a uterus is, how it's treated in the world, how a uterus owner has to consider owning one and what that might mean for them. And that conversation got very different when Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Annie, if you can scroll through some of the views of this piece. And Mark, I'm interested to hear your perspective on why you included Melissa. Of course, the original proposal was this work a part of the original proposal?
No, this was the second proposal of trying to reimagine the exhibition post-COVID. To me, it's really about the timeliness of the piece, that this is like real life things are happening right now that are like being pretty detrimental to women across the board, and that having some sort of conversation around that I thought was it was very inspiring, talking to Melissa about the piece and about how her own experiences, not just with the piece, but as a woman living in this day and age and this existence. So yeah, and it was it is a sculptural object, but it lives beyond that. It's really about this conversation as well. So she's put together a website that people can donate content to about their own personal experiences, which that conversation goes beyond just this single object in the room.
Right. Yeah. And, I'm really interested also in the way that you presented this sculpture. And I also think that it's significant that it's the very first thing that people encounter when they enter the exhibition. It's simultaneously slightly confrontational, but also maybe slightly kind of delicate, and the way that it's in this soft pink glow. So I kind of feel like it does multiple things simultaneously, just in the presentation and in Mark's decision to place it in this area in the gallery. And I'd love to hear more about your aesthetic choices for the lighting and the softness of the sculpture, and how to you, Melissa, that kind of lends itself to the work.
Well, what I loved about doing the underlight situation is it kind of almost gives it a little bit more of a futuristic kind of feel when you're close to it. It has this really wonderful underlight lit glow to it, and then there's a gel on the top of the plexi that allows for any light that's coming in from the gallery to provide a soft rosy glow to the top. And I wanted it to feel somewhat whimsical and celebratory, but I also, the encasement also made me feel like it was kind of trapped in this dream space that it could never get out of. So those two components together is oh, okay, it's a revered thing potentially, but it's controlled. It's in an unmoving, it's in a space that it doesn't have a lot of room to move in.
Right. And also you have the opening, the top is cut out too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also curious about that choice as well.
Well, I think, that was just a natural thing. I wasn't thinking, oh, I really need to create a cut. Well, part of it is the cutout on the top references the form. And I think it kind of solidifies the concept of whenever you see that sort of the diagram that we all see is women investigating what the uterus looks like. And it's that compressed, flat, laid out view. That reference of the cutout on the shape kind of references that overall form. And then again, it's a vessel. So I wanted just to be able to highlight the fact that it's a container.
Right. And is this the first time that you're showing this work in the overturn of Roe v. Wade? Is this, or has it, I know that you've shown an iteration of this prior, but is this the first time you're showing it since that decision?
No, I actually had included it in a faculty show. I'm a teacher at Crossroads School in Santa Monica, and so we every a couple of years we will show what artists in the faculty are currently working on, and so I brought this piece to that space as well.
Cool. And my last question for you, and we'll have more questions for everyone later, and the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions. But I'm curious about, what are some of the stories or conversations that this piece perhaps, or the website, what conversations, and I'm sure maybe some of them have been too personal, but I'm just curious about maybe what this instigates in your interactions with others who encounter this piece or your work on your site.
Mm-hmm. It's been all over the place. Some people find it, really amusing and are super excited about just thinking about the narrative potential of a uterus spaceship and planets, and just kind of a playful narrative. But at the opening, a friend of mine was there, and she pulled me aside and was telling me about that she was born at a time where she was like in her 20s, pre-Roe v. Wade. And that she's like, before Roe v. Wade, like just women would sort of disappear for a while. And then they would come back and they would have mysterious stories about where they've been. And she also, told stories about several of her friends who had decided to have abortions, but of course couldn't do it in a safe way and were unable to have children when they did finally decide it was the right time for them. I also had a conversation with a coworker whose mother had to have an emergency hysterectomy. And he was reading one of my blog posts about my personal hysterectomy. And he was saying how it just created a real empathy that he hadn't felt before, and sort of understood, a lot more about the importance of giving women autonomy over their own bodies. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's what I really appreciate the most about this piece is those conversational, personal stories that it instigates, and that it's so wonderful to hear that actually happened in the gallery at Angels Gate too. And I'm sure as we get visitors encountering this piece, more personal, maybe inner conversations or with other people can be started and prompted by this piece. So thank you for sharing. Yeah, let's take a look. Let's walk down the gallery and take a look at Mark's work. And why don't you tell us about this piece?
So this piece is Small World Teas. So it's this process of a lot of my work is process oriented. The aesthetic outcomes of it are all very different, but the with this piece, it's about this process of collecting used t-shirts and then cataloging those used t-shirts, putting that cataloged information online at smallworldtees.com, kind of rebranding them and repackaging them, then allowing people to leave the gallery with one of these rebranded t-shirts. And so there's a lot of different things that are going on that I'm playing around with. One, it's part of it is this kind of waste idea that we've like fast fashion has like just created such a tremendous amount of waste in our like in the world. Really, it's not just here, because what we throw away then gets baled and sold by the pound and sent to other places, which also disrupts their local economies, because then their own makers aren't like they're not being demanded to make things, so that it's just people are. That's why you see like photos of like little kids in other places in the world with like a Nike t-shirt on. Like it's not something like indigenous to there. It's our waste. It's like what we've thrown away. And the t-shirt to me is the best example of that fast fashion problem because it's so ubiquitous. It's everyone. So since I started, it was before this, I was doing another project called Yardage that was reprocessing t-shirts when, and I forgot when that was, maybe 7-8 years ago. So I've bought one t-shirt since starting that project because and it's because I liked the graphic on the t-shirt, and because I don't need to buy another t-shirt. So I've t-shirts that all look slightly faded, and who cares? It doesn't I mean, it's a t-shirt. So the other side of it is the whole idea about data and how we collect information, which that side of it also started from another project that I did called the Office of the Archivist, where as part of that project, I was studying the records of previous census collections, and then and looking at these generations of decade after decade of census collection, what information was being asked for, really creates the path of what information. That's like the first bias in the whole process of collecting data. And it's really fascinating to see like how that changed over time. Are there even in like currently like where they were like intentionally not collecting data in our last census? Like they're like, okay, we're not going to collect data on like people's like gender identity or sexual orientation. Like we're intentionally not going to collect this information because we don't want to know. So so for me, it's playing with how arbitrary information can be, especially in the ways in which we set up to collect it. So in previous iterations of this project, I had like volunteers entering everything into the database. So it's just things like what size is it, what color is it, what but all the variation that people use in that, like do you put extra large as XL, or do you put extra large as the whole word spelled out, or X with large? So when you look through the data that has been collected, you kind of sense the arbitrariness of it based on individuals' perceptions. Or do you put green down, or do you put mint green down, or do you put sage green down? So to me, that's like ultimately fascinating, like how people interpret what's around them and how they not validate it, but I guess quantify it or or regulate it or put it in some sort of category.
How many t-shirts have been cataloged and gone through this project?
Almost 1,000.
Okay.
So
And do you foresee this continuing indefinitely, or what is your vision? I would love it to go indefinitely as a viewer and someone who's kind of looking and interacting with this. Also, it was very fascinating watching people participate at the opening. But yeah, I'm curious about the lifespan and how you envision this work into the future.
For me, it can go on as long as I can find places to house it. So I'll like, I mean, the type of artwork that I do, really, I'm not much of a studio artist. I'm I'm a project-based artist, so it really is dependent on venues. So I will apply other places with this piece and we'll see what happens with it.
And I'm curious what kind of maybe unexpected or surprising interactions you've had with people who engage with this work in the space.
Yeah, there was actually at the opening, I believe her name was Judith, that she was like I was actually continuing some of the packaging at the front desk while the opening was happening, and she came over and talked to me, and like she was really like she was an older woman, but she was very much like, this is like really is like, she just felt like it really made her understand something new about the whole, because it is, I mean, t-shirts are just, these are just things that are around. I mean, so much of our stuff is just things that are around, and really looking at anything around us and seeing its longer path, like and its longer existence, and what implications that has, and also how we are like kind of quite often like not intentionally complicit in the process. Like it's not like we're trying to create waste, it's just that we maybe haven't even thought about it. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's fascinating is the journey of each of these individual t-shirts. I think that kind of, to me, is a whole new dimension about origin. It's interesting how you put the country of origin, and then some of these are unknown. And to me, that's something where I think about the lifespan of these t-shirts and where they've been and where they're going, and you're redirecting that path from the landfill, and you're intercepting that path, and you're inviting the people who engage with this piece to also intercept with you and cut off that path, or at least delay it significantly. So I'm curious about, maybe just in general, I feel like all of these works, there's a point of intersecting and interception in all of these works. And to me, that's a tying factor in this show that you curated. So that point of interception, to me, that was a very intentional choice, right? To also engage the viewers and participants in that interception.
Yes, absolutely. That's like, I mean, I think it's kind of like the underlying thing of the entire exhibition is about that interception. And I've not thought about it in that way until you were talking about it, like that interception, both like in this realm of this physical object, but also how people engage with the entire exhibition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just so everyone knows, we had a big open call. And as Mark mentioned earlier, it was pre-COVID, literally months before COVID. So it kind of threw us for a loop. And thank you to Mark for being patient and understanding that it really extended our exhibitions calendar because, of course, we were closed to the public for quite a while. So, I really appreciate the fact that you brought this exhibition to Angels Gate, and that also, again, that you brought artists who aren't just from LA, but are kind of from other parts of the US. And kind of with that, I'm actually let's pivot and kind of look at an artist who also deals and is speaking to the clothing industry and fast fashion in a very different way. So Carol, if you would like to talk about this piece in the gallery.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Carol Francis Long, and I'm here in Blancmange, otherwise known as New Orleans, Louisiana. And the piece that's being shown here is the second iteration of a work that was first shown at the Boulder Public Library over 2020, 2021. And it's a Sewing Rebellion production site that's part of the Closed Loop campaign. And the project is called Catch Me Quill Kleidungsstück. And closed loop is a term used in the circular economy describing practices in which materials are reused rather than discarded as waste. Closed loop, the installation, features the work of artists, community members, and businesses that deploy systems of sustainability and social justice and promote the reuse of fiber, textile, and apparel materials. So the first iteration, the samples and the project were actually created in collaboration with Frau Fiber and 3 members of the Mama Leones that's located in Boulder, Colorado. So they generated what the sample would be, and their names are Susana Rodriguez, Adriana Garcia, Blanca Patricia, and they're a group of immigrant women that come together and kind of skill share and support each other as immigrants into the United States. And they were led by Adriana Paola Luna of Luna Cultura of Boulder, Colorado. And so the idea behind the garment, as it's called, it translates in English into little chest garment, was to create a very simple wearable that people could kind of needle felt their personal narrative into. And so this project was also created and paused due to the pandemic. But Frau Fiber hosted several workshops with the Mama Leones. and worked with them to generate this project and create an instructional video that you can see on the Sewing Rebellion website. And so here at Angels Gate, sorry, my dogs are freaking out. Here at Angels Gate, we kind of got to realize the project in the way it was originally envisioned. Because of the pandemic, the Boulder Public Library couldn't just allow participants to have access to the materials anytime the library was open, because they had lost a lot of staff and they couldn't have anybody in the gallery kind of monitoring it. So for this iteration, there's 2 sewing machines and 2 chairs, and participants are invited to come and take some time, slow down a little bit, and make the garment, and then hang it on the wall in exchange for a Sewing Rebellion patch. And then at the conclusion of the exhibition, the garments will be returned to the people that made them. So that's kind of it.
Wonderful. I'm wondering if maybe we can look at some of the more close-up images, if it'll let you. I mean, there's multiple components going on, and I feel like it could be a whole nother long discussion just on the multiple components. You have these vintage sewing machines. To me, that in of itself is interesting. They're the hand crank machines, and maybe if you want to start about your material choices with the hand crank machines, and also the yarn hand spun, I imagine, as well.
No, the wool is actually donated from a wool company in Colorado. So it's like their end pieces and things that are weren't used or were discarded. And I don't have the name of the wool company right in front of me. Wait, let me see if I can find it. I don't think I have it handy here. And the hand crank sewing machines are like a signature machine that Frau intentionally uses, one, because they're not dependent on any electricity and they're much easier for the public to use. They don't have the shock of a power jolt. You have a more direct relationship with the machine, because it's like connected to the speed that your body goes, and it can only go so fast. And then the base fabric, the substrate that the garments are made out of, were actually like another end piece that was acquired by Frau Fiber that was sitting in her Fabric for Life stash. So everything's been kind of through the supply chain and back out again. And the idea is that it keeps it out of just going into the garbage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so I really appreciate that your piece, or this collaboration piece, and Mark's are approximate. They're in conversation with each other. Of course, that's very intentional. And I also appreciated that we also had 3 or 4 individuals actually sit down at the opening and follow the instructions and actually make the garment, which was your intention. And I know before the opening started, we were saying we're unsure, we'll see how it goes. And I was very happy to see that actual activity happen in the gallery. And the other thing I want to know as well is I feel like sewing has a reputation for being less popular with the younger generations. We actually had 2 young women who I believe were in their 20s. So it was also good to see a dynamic range of generations also interacting with the piece as well. And I'm curious to hear about how those conversations went at the opening with those individuals who were engaging in the piece.
Well, I didn't really converse with people at the opening. There was a QR code for them to engage with the instructions and the instructional video. And the instructional video has an avatar of Frau Fiber in it. And so people were just kind of left to their own devices to work through the instructions that were presented to them through the Sewing Rebellion site, the instructional video, and the tech pack. So I didn't listen to their conversations. I was Frau and I both are more interested in seeing how the QR code would work and if people would engage with it, and kind of engage with her instructions through a different format. So I can't really speak to what prompted people to participate. I mean, I did take some photographs at the end of it, but I don't really, and I know that one of the participants like wasn't following the instructions and was kind of reprimanded by another participant, but that's as much as I know.
Well, I feel like that's part of it, right? that interaction of one participant having that reprimanding another. I feel like that's another interesting result of the way that this installation was presented. And I also want to point out another interesting component is the instructional video was in Spanish. And for people who were not Spanish speakers, they had to read the English text that was integrated in the video. And I feel like that was a significant reversal for what we're sort of used to, right? So I thought that was another quite interesting element, and also the fact that this the Sewing Rebellion and the closed loop is led by that group of women who are minorities, I think is also another interesting component and something that to me deserves to be talked about. So I'm really interested that you presented the video that way and people were left to their own devices to figure it out. And it's something that people who look like me, usually we're not left to our own devices to figure things out because things are usually made easier for us, right? So I thought that was another very interesting component that I appreciated of this piece in the gallery. So yeah, we have these 3 pieces that are hanging still, and we hope to get some more in the gallery. So if any of our attendees are in the LA area, you can come and make your own garment throughout the duration of the exhibit, and we'll actually hang it up in the gallery. So thank you for showing us and taking us through that piece. And I'd like to now go over to the end of our room and look at the works by Kelly.
Hi.
So tell us about this piece. And as people can see, we can't stop the auto slideshow. It's giving us some troubles, unfortunately.
No worries.
But why don't you walk us through the piece?
Sure. So this project, so originally I will say that the piece that Mark and I first talked about is the one that we'll talk about next. And this was a sort of adaptation that was made, given that the other work is currently on view elsewhere. But I was excited to bring this piece because it is a sort of sibling to Forever in Your Debt, which is the name of the other project. Both of these works address the student debt crisis, sort of from different vantage points related to my own experience of student debt. And so these are basically overgrown sheets of notebook paper, made to scale. But I used, in order to make them, I adhered individual dollar bills together. So, and then I painted them with a gouache. And in this view, it's a little hard to see, but in some of the other images, I think that you were seeing cycle through, you can see that there's handwriting, cursive writing on these sheets of paper, referencing the sort of punishment of having to write repetitive lines of text that I remember very much still being a thing when I was in grade school, and having to learn how to write in cursive and all of these things. But I will read, actually, for these purposes, the label text, because for this particular work, the label text is very much a part of the work and the conceptual framing of the work. So it states, exactly 20 years prior to making this work, I graduated from college with a student loan debt of approximately $35,000. I took a job teaching English in Japan, where my annual salary totaled roughly $26,000 per year, depending on fluctuations in the exchange rate. Determined to eliminate my educational debt as quickly as possible, I sent monthly remittances equaling nearly 50% of my pay back to the US to be applied towards my loans during the 3 years I spent teaching in Japan. That monthly remitted sum of $960 corresponds to the number of bills utilized in this work. So there's $320 in each of the sheets. Had I been able to invest a single installment of these payments back in 1999, an original $960 would hypothetically have totaled $2,638 at the end of 2019, based on average S&P rates of return, reflecting 20 years of growth. If average annual returns hold for the subsequent 20 years, that same investment would ultimately have grown to $9,706 over the course of my professional working life. This sum is therefore the price of the work. And basically, I go on to say that, if the work doesn't sell, it will basically be dismantled. I made sure, I was very intentional about using only water-soluble materials as I made this piece. So the adhesive and the paints are all, and the pigments are all water soluble, because I basically, it's like no bills were actually irrevocably harmed in the making of this work. And, fully, if the work were not to sell by that subsequent 20-year period, I would basically plop it into a bathtub and, slake it all down and pull the bills apart and return them to viable currency.
Wonderful. So we've had so many people ask us, are those real dollar bills when they encounter this piece in the gallery? And I think it's really playful and interesting how you made it look like the sheet of paper with the punishing "I will not ask for forgiveness." It's really funny because it kind of brings back adolescent memories of being in school and writing on the lined paper. Yet student loan debt is something that you carry into your adulthood, and for some of us for many, many, many years. So I really like how you've combined that element of the recalling those nostalgic memories with this, like, for some people, 10-year, 20-year commitment. So I'm really interested also in what's playful is the thumbtacks or that are really large and really fun and interesting part of this piece. But kind of changing topics a little bit, student loan debt has been in the news a lot recently because of the proposed forgiveness by the president. How has that kind of changed the context of this piece for you? Has it changed the context of this piece for you?
Well, this question sort of relates to both of my projects, actually. And I'd say so far, it hasn't actually changed the context for me because of the fact that this proposed relief is currently being held up. And I believe arguments start in the Supreme Court at the end of this month. And also because I personally am one of the several 100,000 people whose loans were dropped from the proposed forgiveness in anticipation of the lawsuits that were being filed. So particularly this piece, which directly addresses my experience of student debt. Well, and I feel like the forgiveness for me, I realize I'm doubling back a little bit on what I said, but I think, with respect to this piece, this is more of a reflection on an experience that would sort of passed for me personally. Thanks to those monthly remittances, I did pay off that particular sum of $35,000 in 3 years, and wiped away that debt completely, and then was faced with the question of whether to pursue graduate study and to whether to take on that additional debt. But Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly a very live question. And if anything, I think it feels all the more pertinent and urgent for me that both of these projects are sort of out in public space, speaking to this issue in an active way at this time when this conversation is so live. But I think, another facet of the question that you asked is that based on my research into this and reports I've read, I believe it's within 4 years that we would return to the same level of outstanding debt, even with the forgiveness. It may be a little bit longer than that. It's a little on the later side here, so I'm not sure how sharp my brain is at this hour, but it, it's within a very short time span that this debt will actually just reaccrue. So I think while I am certainly an advocate of forgiveness and very excited and hopeful about that proposition, I think that it doesn't fully eradicate the issue, of course. And so I think it's still a very live topic. I do want to just throw in this fun fact about the dollar bills, because it feels important to me as somebody who, I would not have had $960 to freeze in this way, put in stasis in this project, if it were not for a fellowship opportunity that I had that was giving me a materials allowance for on a monthly basis for a stretch of time. And so I was actually able to submit this as a material, compensation or sort of reimbursement. So for me, that was kind of an exciting way to leverage the system to kind of make the statement I wanted to make.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting factoid that artists need funding, not just to be paid to sell their work, but to actually have the materials to make the work. So that's really interesting. I'd like to look at your other piece that's directly across from it, or the video that we have for this other piece. Yes.
So I think we're going to play, some imagery of this installation, which is currently at Mass MoCA up in North Adams, Mass. This piece is basically a visualization of the student debt crisis in the sense that it is meant to visualize the average individual student debt burden currently in the US, which is about $37,000 on average. I mean, of course, this figure fluctuates a little bit from year to year, and but this is, the average individual debt as best I've been able to pin it down. And so I essentially did a calculation years ago in which I figured out that, a pint of mixed coin is worth about $40. Also researched this in various ways to sort of corroborate it. And then set about basically making enough bowls to hold $37,000 in the form of coins. So 37,000 divided by 40 gives you 925. And that's how many bowls are in this installation. And the bowls are really an invitation to participation. So anyone who brings enough coin or otherwise remits it through the digital portal that we have, if someone offers enough change to fill one of the bowls, they are registered to receive one of them at the end of the project's life. So it's a way to both realize this vision that I had years ago for, of illustrating physically in space what this sum looks like, bringing that into dialogue with my own labor through the bowls, which I made on the potter's wheel. But also, something that's always a concern for me is what the afterlife of projects will be. So this idea that the pieces will go on to have another life as domestic objects once they're finished with their time in the museum is a really exciting part of this project for me.
Mm-hmm. And how, maybe you already mentioned, but how long is this project up at Mass MoCA?
So it's been there. I first installed it back in January of 2022, last year. So it's been there almost a little over a year. And the run was recently extended, so it will now be up through fall of this year. And when I took the installation to Masamoka, I had shown it at about 3 or 4 other places prior to the pandemic. And, you know, it was in its own lockdown for about a year or a little more than a year. But I had accumulated about 50 bowls worth of change in those prior shows. And now the installation is a little bit over halfway full. So the part of the thinking is that by virtue of extending it, we might actually reach the goal of filling all of the bowls and sort of seeing this this goal or this vision realized. But I think it's also poignant to note that I did the calculation of, you know, at the 1-year mark, at an average rate of interest accruing, you know, that I would now need to, if I were going to reflect that accurately, I would need to add another 75 bowls in order to illustrate. So that sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back phenomenon of like, yes, there's been progress, and all the while the interest is sort of outrunning me. So I think, which for me is, you know, very much what debt feels like, and part of why it's so pernicious the way that the system is structured. So you know, as painful as that kind of calculation and realization is, I think it's also really reflective of the larger problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it's a shame that we couldn't have it, but I'm very happy to hear that it's at this other location. And it was helpful to you know, have the visual of the video. It's a really beautiful video with music. And a side note, our virtual gallery is public and it's available right now on our website on the landing page for this exhibition. And you can actually watch both of the videos and go through all of the images and read the descriptions, and also check out all the website links as well. But thank you for sort of taking us through that. And I really see how that piece complements the other piece directly across it in the gallery. And now I have a general question for everyone. And obviously the big theme is this engagement and social engagement within your art practice. And I'm curious, and anyone can jump in, any of the artists, how did that become integrated into your work, that social practice, that social engagement? And also, was that the starting point, or maybe was the work the starting point, and then social engagement was a way to expand upon the work? Or maybe did it start the other way around? So I'm kind of curious to hear that from everyone, if you would like to share.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very specific entry point. I actually majored in undergrad. I did ceramics, and I left undergrad, and the idea of like to do artwork was that you had to build a studio, and and also just leaving that experience, it's like, okay, what's the value of what I'm doing? What's the like, if I'm making these objects, like my favorite thing to do was actually to destroy things afterwards, because otherwise it's like hauling ceramics around is heavy. So I actually joined AmeriCorps, which is our domestic Peace Corps, for a year. And I really approached it as the very Boysian social sculpture sort of experience, that I'm going to do things to try to kind of make the world I live in like more reflective of the things I would like to see. And that's actually early on, Melissa and I have known each other for a long time. So Melissa participated in one of the projects during my time in AmeriCorps, and but it became at the time it wasn't like it was me grappling with like, okay, how do I had always separated these ideas of like doing things to make what's around me better, and then my art making. I always had kept them separate, and then they just merged more and more and more over the years. And I still kind of do like secret studio work. Like I like to go make things. Like I had an exhibition of small sculptures last year that it's the first time ever that I had an exhibition that had things on pedestals. Which is like, it's like, oh, this looks like an art exhibition. And so it's like, it just something about engaging with other people is always more, just became the most important thing for my making process over time.
Well, thank you for sharing that. If and any of our other artists would like to share. No pressure.
Well, I'll just hop off of Mark's, yeah, because we have known each other for a while. And really, when I was thinking about the question, like what came first, or how does social engagement contribute to your work, I hadn't really thought about that being a component before the uterus spaceship. But then as I was thinking about it more, I was like, well, no, like I'm a teacher, and like I have done a lot of, like I teach digital art and animation. And so there's a ton of social engagement with every day that I am getting to share processes and making with students. And prior to actually having a full-time job as a teacher, I did workshops like the one that Mark was referencing, where we worked with children in the neighborhood that he worked at and did a photography course and exhibition. And I would oftentimes do things like that in the summer, where I would work with different communities and do like animation workshops or filmmaking workshops. So that has been interesting, but this is the first piece that I've actually done that is sculptural, and it's the first thing that I've done that lives on a pedestal as well. Because I'm an animator normally, so most of my stuff is screen-based, monitor-based, interactive monitor-based. But it was, so the interactivity component was inspired by the piece. And I think just it's an exciting way to think about future work for me too. So I think this might actually shift where I go from here and think about more ways to create work that has an engagement component.
Mm-hmm. Carol, I see that there's a comment that's kind of responding to this question that was also posed by Carrie in the chat. I wonder if you want to share with us this response.
Well, I was just saying to Carrie that I'm trying to think back. I took an art and activism class when I went to grad school as a 38-year-old after a career in the fashion industry. And I think that was some of my first introductions to kind of ideas around social practice. And when I was in school, the relational aesthetics book came out. There was a lot of, there was also a book called Conversation Pieces by Grant Kessler that came out. And it seemed to be a direction that just resonated with me. And thinking back on it, I was always like I grew up in Southern California in the late 60s, early 70s, and I didn't learn math or writing. I learned how to have friendship circles. So I was like a child of this, the hippie era, and just like wanting to be a better communicator. And, I had to catch up on the math and the writing later on down the road. But I think that laid the early groundwork. I was also, as a kid from like 5 to 18, I did tap, ballet, and jazz. So like performing was always part of my growing up. And I, was a burner before people even knew what Burning Man was on a national, international scale. So there was all these kind of like moments in my past before I went to grad school where I was engaging in that way. And then in grad school, I was just able to find the language. And then I think studying at the Bauhaus University in Weimar gave me the opportunity to really get kind of outside of myself. And that was the moment where like I met Frau and we became collaborators, and through a socially engaged work where I was making clothing, and then she came into my shop and we met, and that was just kind of the start of it. And it was that way for a long time. We both have withdrawn since the December of 2019, right before the pandemic hit. We started to withdraw the social engagement part of things, and that was after like a 14-year run of doing programs almost every single week without stopping. So that's kind of where I came from.
Right. And Kelly, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it was kind of coming from multiple directions at when I was in grad school. I mean, I remember, I think I went in with this consideration, or a certain amount of, I guess I would say, weight or burden around what I mentioned earlier, just the consideration of taking on more debt to study. And I think that was circling, and it felt like I felt as though if I were going to pursue this as a path that I needed in some sense to really, be intentional about what I was choosing to address through my work, and to use it to speak to social issues like that. It was kind of a swirling mass of kind of thoughts and inspirations. That was part of it. I remember one of my professors asking me very early on, before I even enrolled at RISD, like, what feels urgent to you? And for me, that urgency was not material nor sort of formal in nature. It did really, when I asked myself that question, what came back was very much related much more to content, and to, concept, and how I would choose to engage with the world around me through my artwork. I think it also related to questions of sustainability, and, also having a background in performance, thinking about things that were perhaps more immediate, and of the moment that, that I was always, I think from the very start of grad school, I was very concerned about, as I said earlier, the afterlife of projects, especially in grad school, where I felt like most of it was just experimenting. And I remember feeling very just weighted by the idea that I was going to be making, especially in ceramics, I was going to be making these objects that were going to become fired and be fixed and sort of just, but they were just sketches. Like normally I would have recycled the paper. But if it was a ceramic object, it couldn't happen. So yeah, I think those were some of the things that were feeding that for me. And also, being exposed for the first time to relational aesthetics, starting to think about art in a very different way.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers. That was really insightful. And we're coming up to the end of this event, but this is the opportunity, if there are any questions, or if you would like to engage to the audience members, you are invited to directly ask questions in the chat, or if you're comfortable, you can turn on your mic. If not, I understand you don't have to pop up on screen, but if you're comfortable and would like to do so, we'd love to have any other audience questions or feedback. And while I give the audience a moment to maybe think of what those questions might be, I do want to make sure that all of you can sort of follow each of our artists. So maybe Annie, in the meantime, if you want to pull up the slide that sort of gives you, yep. So this is the information for each of our artists that are here today. Thank you for joining us tonight and being candid in your responses. Does any of our artists want to sort of, now's your opportunity to maybe promote if you have any other shows that are coming up. I know, Kelly, you said your piece is currently at Mass MoCA. Does anyone want to self-promote a little bit or anything that we can go to? If not, that's okay if you don't want to share, but I want to present that opportunity to our artists.
I have work up at the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art. It's up until I think the end of this month, which is coming up really quickly. And then I'll have work in a group show called Woven Histories that opens in LAC on September 17th.
Oh, congratulations. Awesome. Does anyone else want to share? Or are you feeling like
I'm all in process right now. Like half of art is applying to things.
yes, it is a waiting game of applying and waiting to hear. I get that. Yeah, well, does anyone have any last questions for our audience? I know we did cover a lot, but are there any last questions from any of our attendees that are here? Okay, well,
I have something that if sorry, I'm echoing in my headphones. I really liked what a few of you, especially Kelly, have talked about the afterlife of projects. The thinking beyond when an object or an installation is in the gallery and looking ahead to where is this going to live, or how is this going to, like, what is the afterlife, like Kelly said. And I love the way that that relates to the theme of sustainability that's in so many of your practices. Is that something that's consciously thought about in terms of sustainability, or is it something that you have just kind of, because also in Carol's work, like at the end of our installation, the pieces are going to be returned to the people who made them, and the way that the t-shirts are dispersed. I just wondered if anyone had anything else they wanted to say about that.
I think about that a lot. And so recently I just had the opportunity to work with 2 students from Cal State LA that have archived every single object that Frau has either made or collected over the last 15 years. And I'm in the process of, everything has been numbered and cataloged on intake forms in a very formal, like, archival way. And I'm in the process of, and it's probably gonna take me like another 5 or 10 years to get through that, deciding where those objects go, and if I'm more interested in them actually going back out into the waste stream with some kind of marker where people can share that when they find these objects. Although when I tell that to archivists and other museum curators, they get really upset with me. So I'm trying to figure out, like, if they do go into an institution, what's the institution, and thinking about it super intentionally. Like, the Cornell University has the largest archive of ILGWU, the International Women's Garment Workers Union ephemera. And so I always think about it like in terms of things going there versus, being collected by a museum or anything, or just going out into the waste stream again. So that's kind of the thing I'm grappling with at the moment. But I've also I do just take stuff to Goodwill all the time, like things that were made for projects or something. Or I've also done these kind of like pay what you want sales, where basically I'm giving this stuff away, but I'm more interested in it continuing to be part of the system that it came from than it ending up in a collector's hands. Like, I'm not interested in that at all. So that's where my head's at right now.
Yeah, I would really echo like Carol's like thoughts on the idea of it, like artwork being like this collector's item or this precious object that so I do a lot of different types of artwork, and one of the things I do are large scale installation projects that are usually composed out of paper, like folded paper. So the last one just came down. It's folded paper and this upcycled wool from a local manufacturer. So when that piece came down, all the paper then gets recycled, and all of the wool yarn was also recycled. And I was very fortunate to have some people on the ground that were able to coordinate that for me. But my work really only exists during the project phase. And then after that, it's only like a digital archive.
Yeah, great question. Something
Thank you.
that I hadn't thought about before and for, for everyone's work. Great. Well, if there are no other comments and questions, I do want to just also let people know that there's more opportunities to engage with the exhibit. It's going to be up through March 25th. And it's open Thursdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then if you're not local to us, like some of our artists, we also have the virtual that Annie was sharing online. And we also have these other events coming up. Something to highlight Studio Soup, another virtual talk. We're very thrilled to have Dominique Moody and Narciso Martinez. So that is on our website. And then April 15th, we have Open Studios Day. In addition to a gallery, we have just over 50 artist studios, and they only open their doors to the public twice a year. So that's coming up on April 15th from noon to 4. Thank you to our artists for the conversation. Thank you, Mark, for bringing this exhibition proposal to us a couple years ago and finally realizing your vision at Angels Gate. Thank you to Annie, who has run the tech and organized the meeting in the background and did all the lead up work to this. And thank you all for joining us on a Thursday night. And a quick note, we are a nonprofit organization. So of course, thank you to our sponsors who make our public programming possible at the center. So thank you all. Have a great and wonderful rest of your evening. And if you haven't seen this exhibition in person, please come to see it in person. Everything's better in person, of course, and it's up through March 25th. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.